aches and empty rooms. The mattress was a battlefield. Arthur Abernathy waged war with it every morning, a silent, groaning conflict of protesting joints and reluctant muscles. Today, the enemy seemed to have the upper hand. A dull ache throbbed in his lower back, a familiar tormentor that had taken up permanent residence. He pushed himself up with trembling arms, the effort sending a jolt of pain through his shoulder. He sat on the edge of the bed, his bare feet cold against the worn wooden floor. The room was bathed in the pale light of dawn, revealing the threadbare rug and the peeling wallpaper, remnants of a life lived and loved. On the bedside table, nestled amongst pill bottles and a chipped teacup, sat Barnaby, his teddy bear. Arthur reached for Barnaby, his fingers gnarled and stiff. He clutched the bear to his chest, the soft fur worn smooth from years of comforting hugs. A wave of sorrow washed over him, sharp and familiar. He remembered Clara, her gentle hands carefully stitching Barnaby's ripped ear after a particularly boisterous afternoon with their grandchildren. Clara, his anchor, his confidant, gone these past 5 years. "Morning, old friend," he whispered to Barnaby, his voice raspy with disuse. Another day, another battle. He shuffled towards the bathroom, his slippers whispering against the floorboards. The house was quiet, achingly so. He used to resent the morning clamor of children and the bustle of Clara preparing breakfast. Now, he longed for it. The mirror reflected a stranger back at him, a frail old man with thinning grey hair and eyes that held a deep well of sadness. He splashed cold water on his face, hoping to shock some life back into his weary bones. His doctor's appointment loomed, a dark cloud on the horizon. He dreaded it. Dr. Albright was a brisk, efficient man, good at his job, no doubt, but lacking in kindness. Arthur suspected the doctor saw him as just another aging body, a drain on the system. He imagined the pronouncements, the grim diagnoses, the list of medications that would do little more than prolong the inevitable. He dressed slowly, each movement a deliberate act. His tweed jacket, carefully brushed and mended, felt heavy on his shoulders. He checked his pocket for his appointment card, his fingers tracing the embossed lettering. Leaving the house was an ordeal. The front steps seemed steeper than he remembered. He gripped the railing, his knuckles white. Each step sent a sharp pang through his knees. He paused at the bottom, catching his breath, and surveyed the street. It was a typical Tuesday morning. Cars rushed past, oblivious to his struggle. People hurried along, their faces buried in their phones, their lives a whirlwind of activity. He felt invisible, a ghost in his own life. The clinic was a good 15-minute walk. He started slowly, his shoulders hunched against the chill wind. His pace was a shuffle, each step a victory against the relentless ache in his joints. The world seemed to rush past him, a blur of colors and sounds. He was a small boat adrift in a turbulent sea, struggling to stay afloat. He just hoped he could make it to the clinic before he capsized. 7 minutes of dismissal. The door to examination room 3 swung open with a perfunctory thud. Dr. Stern didn't bother to announce himself, didn't even offer a cursory good morning. He simply strode in, his starched white coat rustling like impatient wings, and grabbed Mr. Abernathy's chart from the metal clip on the door. Arthur Abernathy, perched precariously on the edge of the examination table, his thin legs dangling, offered a hopeful, if somewhat strained, smile. "Good morning, Doctor." "Lovely day, isn't it?" Dr. Stern grunted, his eyes glued to the chart. Abernathy, Arthur. 82 years old. Chief complaint, generalized pain. He barely registered the old man's presence, his voice flat, devoid of inflection. "And where exactly is this generalized pain, Mr. Abernathy?" Arthur shifted, a wince flickering across his face. "Well, it's everywhere, really. My back aches, especially in the mornings. My knees feel like they're full of gravel. And lately, my hands have been so stiff I can barely hold my coffee cup." He held up a gnarled hand, the knuckles swollen and red. Stern didn't look. He scribbled something on the chart. "And you've been taking your medication, as prescribed?" "Yes, doctor, religiously. But it doesn't seem to be helping much anymore. Stern sighed, a dramatic, theatrical sound that filled the small room. Mr. Abernathy, at your age, some aches and pains are to be expected. The body wears down. It's a natural process. He finally looked up, his gaze clinical, detached. There's not much we can do about it. Arthur's smile faltered. But it's getting worse, Doctor. I can hardly sleep. And I feel so alone. The last word hung in the air, a fragile, almost inaudible plea. Stern ignored it. He tapped the chart with a pen. We can increase your dosage of ibuprofen, but frankly, Mr. Abernathy, at your age, you need to accept that this is just old age catching up with you. He glanced at his watch, a stainless steel Rolex that glinted under the fluorescent lights. Anything else? Arthur opened his mouth to speak, to explain the gnawing loneliness that had settled in his bones since Martha passed, to describe the fear that clawed at him in the long, silent nights. But Dr. Stern was already moving towards the door. Just try to stay active, Mr. Abernathy, he said, his hand on the doorknob. And try to maintain a positive attitude. Those things can make a big difference. He flashed a perfunctory, almost pained smile. I'll have my nurse schedule you for a follow-up in 6 months. Unless, of course, something drastic changes. The door clicked shut, leaving Arthur alone in the sterile room, the lingering scent of antiseptic a cold reminder of his own mortality. He looked down at his hands, those gnarled, painful hands that had once held a rifle, steered a plane, built a life. Now, they could barely hold a coffee cup. 7 minutes. That's all it had taken to be dismissed, to be reduced to a collection of aches and pains, a statistic in a doctor's busy schedule. He slowly slid off the examination table, his joints protesting with every move. He felt older than ever before. The weight of worthlessness. The frigid bite of the park bench permeated Mr. Abernathy's flimsy trousers, a deep-seated cold that resonated with the ache in his soul. He hugged Barnaby, his time-worn teddy bear, a little closer. The matted fur offered scant warmth, yet its familiar bulk served as a small buoy in the turbulent waters of despair threatening to engulf him. Hot tears welled and carved glistening trails down his lined face, catching in the grizzled stubble. He should have been admiring the daffodils bursting forth in the flowerbeds, flashes of gold against the somber scene, supposedly symbols of hope reborn. Instead, all he registered was the oppressive grey overhead, the persistent throb in his joints, the gnawing sense of superfluity. He recalled a period when his hands, now twisted and trembling, possessed strength. He conjured the feeling of accomplishment derived from erecting homes, setting studs, completing roofs. He savored the recollection of rough palms, beaded sweat, and the fellowship of the construction crew. He excelled at it. He was needed. The houses he erected remained standing, steadfast and secure, sheltering families within. He would once stand back and feel a swell of satisfaction, a silent conviction that he had provided something of consequence to the world. Now? He found it challenging to pour a simple cup of tea without spilling half. A sudden breeze rustled through the denuded branches of an adjacent oak, unleashing a cascade of desiccated leaves that swirled around him. He shuddered, drawing his shabby cardigan tighter about him. He had to rise soon, had to force himself toward Dr. Stern's consultation room. The notion filled him with apprehension. Dr. Stern, a seemingly sympathetic man. But his pronouncements. They echoed in Mr. Abernathy's head, magnified by the solitude and the distress. Realistically, Mr. Abernathy, the doctor had stated, his tone gentle but resolute, considering your age and your limitations, you are requiring a considerable allocation of resources. Are you certain you wish to proceed with the treatment? It might be kinder to contemplate. Contemplate what? Releasing his grip? Capitulating? Diminishing his burden? The image of his deceased wife, Eleanor, flickered in his mind. Eleanor, with her radiant smile and unwavering faith in him. You always improve things, Arthur, she was wont to say. You always uncover a solution. But Eleanor was gone. And the Arthur she championed felt like an antiquated phantom, a shadow of his former self. He glanced at his timepiece, the face scratched and hazed with age. Nearly time. Time to confront Dr. Stern, time to acknowledge the truth, that he was aged, infirm, and an encumbrance to those surrounding him. Barnaby, held firmly, provided no answers, merely the recognizable, consoling weight. Even that bore down on him now, heavy with the burden of worthlessness. The cheerful daffodils mocked him with their brazen, undeserved optimism. He shut his eyes, and a singular tear escaped, tracing a solitary course down his cheek and disappearing into the abraded fur of his precious teddy bear. A medal and a memory. The air in the waiting room was thick with the scent of disinfectant and forgotten newsprint. Arthur Abernathy adjusted his posture, the synthetic upholstery clinging to his back like a clammy hand. Barnaby, his steadfast teddy bear, was embraced a bit more firmly. A dull, persistent throb echoed in his hip, a bodily metronome counting down the years. Doctor visits were a burden, each one a stark reminder of encroaching age, dwindling strength, and the creeping feeling of becoming invisible. A child's voice, bright as a newly minted coin, cut through his gloom. "He's a very handsome bear." Startled, Arthur looked up. A girl, perhaps 8, stood before him, her gaze alight with curiosity, a constellation of freckles dusting her nose. He summoned a weak smile. "Thank you. This is Barnaby." "He looks so soft," she offered, inching closer. "And what's that sparkly thing?" Her small finger pointed to the dulled bronze medal pinned to Barnaby's chest. The ribbon, bleached by time, and the metal, rubbed lackluster, still hinted at its form, a star dangling from a clasp. Arthur hesitated, a knot forming in his stomach. The medal. A chapter of his life he'd long sealed shut. Memories, acrid with the aroma of burning fuel, screamed with the voices of dying men, and vibrated with the concussive force of explosions threatened to overwhelm him. He tried to bury it all, but Barnaby, in his quiet, unwavering way, was a tangible thread to that past. "It's a medal," he rasped. "What's it for?" Her eyes, guileless and wide, held pure interest. He gazed down at Barnaby, his worn fur, his slightly mismatched button eyes. "For Valor," he managed, the word feeling brittle on his tongue. "A long time ago, in a war far, far away." "Were you a soldier?" she inquired. He gave a slow nod. "Long ago, yes." "Did you fight dragons?" she asked, her tone filled with fantasy. Arthur chuckled, a dry, rattling sound escaping his throat. "Not dragons, sweetheart. Something far more monstrous." He paused, the specters of the past swirling like phantoms. He hadn't wanted to unearth these memories, to stir the sediment of buried horrors. Yet, in the girl's unshadowed gaze, he sensed a unique, gentle invitation. He cleared his throat, his voice gaining timbre. "It was in the Pacific," he began, the words flowing more easily now. "I was just a boy, almost your age. We were caught on a beach, under relentless fire. Our medic took a hit, a bad one. He was screaming, and no one could reach him. I crawled out there. Through the storm of bullets, the cascading explosions. I got him back to the trench." He paused, his breath hitching. The sterile waiting room had dissolved. He was back on that cursed beach, the air thick with smoke and the stench of mortality. "They gave me this shiny trinket for it," he said, his fingers tracing the tarnished metal. "But the real prize was the awareness I offered aid." The girl's gaze sparkled. "That's incredible." "It seems like a lifetime ago," Arthur reiterated, his voice softening with age. "A completely different person." He looked up at the girl, offering a genuine smile, for the first time that day. "My name is Arthur." "I'm Lily," she chirped, her own smile radiant. "I'm glad I met you, Arthur, and Barnaby too." As Lily bounded back to her mother, Arthur Abernathy felt a pleasant warmth unfurl in his chest, taking the edge off the ache in his hip. Just a little. For a fleeting moment, the waiting room seemed less oppressive, less sterile. The medal, tarnished and time-worn, felt a fraction lighter. The file's revelation. The overhead lights droned, each pulse a tiny hammer blow against Sarah's taut sanity. Outside, the night was a thick, impenetrable curtain. Her in-tray teetered precariously, each chart a silent accusation. She scrubbed at her weary eyes, the grit a tangible reminder of the day's relentless demands, a day that refused to relinquish its hold. Dr. Stern's careless dismissal of Mr. Abernathy still rankled, a persistent chill under her skin. "Just endure, Sarah. Just endure." A flash of red snagged her attention, Mr. Abernathy's file. On Stern's desk. Not filed, not reviewed, but perched amidst the doctor's sterile arrangement of stationery like an intruder. A surge of alertness cut through her exhaustion. Something was amiss. That file belonged with the others, awaiting processing, not showcased on the desk of the man who'd so casually brushed him aside. She crossed the room, her footsteps absorbed by the plush carpet, and lifted the document. The manila felt coarse against her fingertips. A sweep of the label sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't Mr. Abernathy's regular medical history. It was his Veterans Affairs record, mistakenly delivered with the patient's details and, somehow, overlooked. Stern hadn't even bothered to glance inside. Conscience wrestled with curiosity, but the injustice toward Mr. Abernathy prevailed. If Stern refused to acknowledge it, someone would. Someone had to. She opened the file to reveal a meticulously ordered collection of papers, discharge forms, commendations, testimonials. Yet, it was the narrative that stole her breath. Handwritten accounts chronicling his Korean War service. Tales of valor, of sacrifice, of insurmountable odds vanquished with quiet fortitude. She read of a young Abernathy, scarcely more than a boy, single-handedly stalling an enemy assault, buying invaluable time for his unit's safe withdrawal. Medals for bravery, Purple Hearts marking wounds suffered in action. The file unveiled a man utterly unlike the subdued, unassuming patient she'd encountered that day. A hero, not a nuisance. A knot tightened in her throat. Stern's dismissive tone resounded in her mind, amplified by the stark reality of the man's past. How could anyone be so blind? So uncaring? The weight of the file suddenly felt immense, not merely in her grasp, but within her soul. This wasn't just a clerical error, it was a profound failing, a betrayal of the respect Mr. Abernathy was owed. She knew she couldn't condone this. She wouldn't. A crowd of listeners. "Dr. Stern, you have to listen." Sarah's voice, usually a calm stream, was a rushing torrent. She practically yanked him away from his meticulously organized desk, its surface gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. "There's been a mistake. A huge one. Abernathy's file, it was mixed up with someone else's. He's not just some." She trailed off, searching for a less offensive word than the one that sprang to mind, regular patient. "He's a war hero, Dr. Stern. Decorated. Distinguished Service Cross. I just saw the original file." Stern's carefully constructed composure threatened to crumble. A file mix-up? This was precisely the kind of administrative incompetence that sent his blood pressure soaring. "Sarah, I have a waiting room full of patients. I don't have time for." He was telling me about his experiences earlier, Sarah pressed on, her grip on his arm tightening. "He served in the Korean War. He was a medic. He saved lives, Dr. Stern. A lot of lives." The image of Abernathy, hunched and seemingly frail, flashed through Stern's mind. A war hero? It seemed impossible. Still, doubt gnawed at him. If Sarah was right, and the file she was talking about proved it, then his earlier assessment, his dismissive words. Panic, cold and clammy, began to seep into his veins. "Show me," he demanded, his voice sharper than intended. Sarah led him back to the reception area, her face etched with concern. "He's outside," she said, pointing towards the small patio area the clinic had set up for patients waiting for their appointments. He needed some air. Stern practically bolted through the glass doors. The late afternoon sun hit him like a physical blow, momentarily blinding him. As his vision cleared, he saw them. A crowd. Not a large one, but a definite gathering of people, all facing the same direction. And in the center, seated on a wrought iron bench, was Abernathy. He was talking. Not the rambling, slightly confused murmuring Stern had heard earlier. This was a clear, strong voice, filled with a gravity that resonated even from this distance. Stern pushed his way through the small group, his ears straining to catch the words. A young girl, no older than 8, with bright, inquisitive eyes, looked up at him, her face alight with fascination. It was Lily Johnson, old Mrs. Johnson's granddaughter. "We were pinned down," Abernathy was saying, his gaze fixed on some distant point. Mortar fire raining down. Men screaming. And all I could think was, someone needs help. Someone needs me. He paused, and for a moment, the only sound was the gentle hum of the air conditioning unit from inside the building. So, I went. Crawled on my belly through the mud and the shrapnel. Got to him. He was bleeding bad. Real bad. A woman with kind eyes dabbed at her own with a tissue. A young man in a business suit leaned forward, captivated. Stern felt a strange tightening in his chest. He'd expected to find Abernathy alone, muttering to himself. He hadn't expected this. A crowd of listeners, hanging on his every word. He hadn't expected a war hero. An apology rejected. Dr. Stern felt sweat prickle his forehead, a clammy sheen under the fluorescent lights. He pushed through the small crowd that had gathered, muttering a perfunctory "excuse me" to Mrs. Higgins, whose disapproving gaze bored into him. The air in the waiting room, already thick with the scent of antiseptic and stale coffee, seemed to condense around him, suffocating. Abernathy was still talking, his voice now a low, gravelly hum that resonated with a strange, unsettling power. Lily Johnson, the young woman from accounting, was practically glued to his side, her eyes wide with rapt attention. Stern could see the reflected glint of fascination in her lenses. He reached Abernathy's side and placed a hand, far too firmly, he realized a fraction of a second too late, on the old man's arm. Abernathy didn't flinch, didn't even acknowledge the touch. "Mr. Abernathy," Stern began, his voice cracking slightly. He cleared his throat, forcing a semblance of authority. "Mr. Abernathy, I wanted to apologize." The old man paused, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the chipped paint of the opposite wall. A long, unsettling silence stretched, punctuated only by the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor on the far side of the room. "The shelling," Abernathy continued, his voice regaining its momentum as if Stern hadn't spoken at all. "It was relentless. Non-stop. You could feel it in your bones, you know? The ground trembling, the air thick with the smell of cordite and fear." He shuddered, a barely perceptible tremor that ran through his frail frame. Lily Johnson gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. Stern felt a wave of nausea churn in his stomach. This was going horribly wrong. "Mr. Abernathy," he tried again, his voice rising in pitch, desperation lacing his tone. "Please, I said some things I didn't mean. I was stressed. I apologize." Abernathy's eyes, clouded with age and memory, finally flickered in Stern's direction, but there was no recognition, no anger, no forgiveness. Just an empty, vacant stare that seemed to pierce right through him. He returned his gaze to Lily, a faint smile playing on his lips. "We were pinned down for 3 days. 3 days, mind you, without food, without water. Just the rats and the shelling." The crowd shifted, a collective rustle of disapproval that washed over Stern like a cold wave. He could feel their judgment, their silent condemnation. Even Mrs. Higgins, who usually fawned over him, was glaring. He stood there, frozen, the weight of his words, of his arrogance, crushing him. The apology, so carefully rehearsed in his head, felt hollow, meaningless in the face of Abernathy's unwavering narrative. Rejected. Utterly, completely rejected. He withdrew his hand, the clamminess now a full-blown sweat soaking his palms. He felt smaller, insignificant, a pale imitation of the confident doctor he thought he was. He turned and, without a word, retreated, the murmurs of the crowd following him like a shroud. A flower and a smile. Lily skipped ahead, the gravel path crunching under her sneakers. The park's late afternoon sun painted everything in hues of gold and amber. Mr. Abernathy shuffled along behind her, his gait still a little unsteady, his eyes fixed on the ground. The doctor's words, Lily knew, were heavy baggage. She veered off the path towards a small, meticulously kept garden bursting with color. Red geraniums, bright yellow daffodils, and vibrant purple petunias jostled for space, their sweet fragrance thick in the air. Her eye scanned the beds, searching. She wasn't looking for the perfect bloom, but the right one. Finally, she spotted it. A single, unassuming daisy, slightly smaller than the others, but radiating a quiet resilience. It stood tall, its white petals unfurling around a sunny yellow center. Carefully, she pinched the stem just below the flower head, snapping it cleanly. Turning back, she saw Mr. Abernathy watching her, his brow furrowed with a question. He seemed smaller somehow, diminished by the invisible weight he carried. Lily rushed towards him, her hand outstretched, the daisy a beacon in her palm. "Mr. Abernathy," she said, her voice bright and clear, "this is for you." He looked at the flower, then at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and something akin to suspicion. "For me? Why?" Lily's heart squeezed with a mixture of pity and fierce determination. "Because," she began, searching for the right words, "because you're a hero. Because you fought for our country. Because you're important." She thrust the flower forward, her hand trembling slightly. "And because," she added, a little shyly, "I wanted to say thank you." He didn't take the flower immediately. He just stared at it, his gaze intense, as if trying to decipher a hidden message in its simple petals. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Lily held her breath, wondering if she'd made a mistake. Then, slowly, a change came over his face. The lines etched by years of hardship and unspoken pain seemed to soften, to ease. His lips, which had been tight and drawn, began to curve upwards. It wasn't a big smile, not a boisterous one, but a small, genuine, almost hesitant smile that reached his eyes and made them sparkle. He reached out a gnarled hand, his fingers brushing against hers as he took the flower. He held it gently, as if it were a fragile treasure. "Thank you, Lily," he said, his voice rough with emotion. That's very kind of you." The smile remained on his face as he looked down at the daisy, turning it slowly in his fingers. For the first time since she'd met him, he seemed lighter, the burden on his shoulders lessened. The flower, a simple token of appreciation, had somehow managed to pierce through the wall of despair and touch the man beneath. As they continued their walk, Mr. Abernathy kept the daisy clutched tightly in his hand, a splash of hope against the drabness of his coat. The setting sun cast long shadows, but now, in Lily's eyes, they seemed less menacing, more like a gentle embrace. Beyond 7 minutes. The waiting room's fluorescent light seemed to amplify their drone as Arthur Abernathy pushed himself to his feet. He smoothed his tweed, a faint, wistful smile gracing his face. "Well, Lily, it appears my business here is concluded." Lily Johnson, perched expectantly, sparkled with genuine warmth. "It was so lovely talking with you, Mr. Abernathy. Truly." She gathered her sketchbook, the charcoal likeness of the old man nestled securely within. Dr. Stern, still framed by his office doorway, offered no farewell, not even a nod. The resulting silence felt weighty, charged. "Perhaps we might continue this conversation over coffee," Mr. Abernathy suggested, his voice resonating with surprising strength. "There's a small cafe just up the block. The Daily Grind, as I recall." Lily's face brightened. "I'd like that very much." They moved toward the exit, Abernathy ushering Lily through with old-world grace. As they passed, his gaze met Dr. Stern's. There was no pique in his expression, no trace of bitterness. Only quiet self-respect. "Good day, Doctor," he stated evenly, then departed. Stern remained motionless, the surrounding quiet only intensifying the frantic pulse in his ears. He watched the unlikely pair stroll away, their heads inclined toward one another in animated exchange. Lily gestured eagerly, her sketchbook tucked securely beneath her arm, while Abernathy listened with focused attention, offering gentle nods. The late afternoon sun gilded Abernathy's silver hair, giving him an almost ethereal glow. He observed the lightness in the old man's step, a newfound vigor previously absent. Most significantly, he registered the authentic rapport between them, a shared empathy that defied generational divides and circumstance. Suddenly, the cloying scent of disinfectant, the clinical chill of the space, seemed to close in. His white coat felt like a leaden cloak, a symbol not of authority, but of profound isolation. He conjured images of his stark, vacant apartment, its meticulously arranged success trophies, the framed accolades, the medical publications, the expensive artwork he rarely saw. The cafe. The daily grind. In his mind's eye, they were seated at a small table, the rich aroma of coffee mingling with the background hum of conversation. Lily, sketching furiously, capturing the very soul of Abernathy's tales. Abernathy, at long last, finding a receptive audience, a purpose for his fading recollections. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, the gesture born more of weariness than agitation. He recalled the fragments of stories Abernathy had shared, glimpses of wartime struggles, echoes of loss and profound fortitude. Stories he'd summarily dismissed as irrelevant, an encroachment on his precious time slot. He had reduced the man to a mere inconvenience, an obstacle to his rigidly scheduled day, a stark reminder of his own inevitable decline. He had failed to recognize the person, the life experienced, the history embodied within. He had prioritized his inflated sense of self, his fragile confidence, over the fundamental act of empathy. Now, the waiting room lay desolate, the silence a palpable force. He retreated to his office, the door clicking shut behind him with a dull thud. He sank heavily into his leather chair, the weight of his choices bearing down on him. Beyond those 7 minutes, he reflected, lay a universe he had deliberately shut out, a universe vibrant with narratives, connections, and the quiet dignity of a life lived to the fullest. A universe he was increasingly uncertain how to navigate.